From the Soapbox is the official podcast for the American Animal Hospital Association's digital newsroom, Trends. Here, we take inspiration from the familiar soap notes, but instead of looking at the condition of a patient, we're diagnosing and discussing the state of the veterinary industry. We'll chat about the challenges, trends, and innovations shaping the veterinary world with voices from across the community. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Singler. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of From the Soapbox. My guest today is Dr. Peter Weinstein. He is a veterinarian with over 40 years of experience in practice, a former practice owner multiple times over, a business and practice management consultant, speaker, and subject matter expert. He's also a really good sport because I came to him with practice management and ownership questions from all over the place, and he took them all in stride and shared some great insight. Some of my questions were ones that were suggested by members of the AHA community, and some of them were ones that I have heard others raise in various forums, but all of them have to do with timely topics that our profession is grappling with on a daily basis. And to clarify, this conversation is not just important for practice owners and managers. We talked about economic uncertainty as it relates to veterinary revenue, cost of care, well-being challenges, veterinary team member shortages, and an optimistic outlook for aspiring practice owners, and a million other things that you're just going to have to listen to find out about. Without further ado, getting his time to talk from the soapbox, Dr. Peter Weinstein. All right. Well, Dr. Peter Weinstein, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really glad to have you here.
Emily, it's a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this, and thank you so much for the invitation to join you. I look forward to sharing ideas and mulling over the issues.
To start out with, I just kind of wanted to touch on the state of our profession. And I know there are so many different parts to that, but we're past the COVID-19 pandemic and that whole, pet boom where all of the discussion was, we're not going to have enough veterinarians for a really long time. We're going to have this huge shortfall of veterinarians to meet all the needs of the pet owning public, and so that all the pets that need care can have care. And what are we going to do about that? And then there was all this discussion about, is that really true or is it not? And now we've heard of practices that have, in some cases, been trying to hire an associate for years without any success. And then now we've got all these new vet schools that are in the works in various stages, some close to opening, some probably years away. And then at the same time now, at least I'm hearing a lot of reports from practices talking about client visits being down a lot more than what they would expect for the time of year. Presumably, maybe this is not the whole story, but I presume that is potentially due to a current or looming recession and other changes with the economy. But I'm just curious on sort of what your take is on where we are as a profession, what we're facing right now. Do we have enough veterinarians? Are we going to be hit with this sort of overburden of veterinarians when we have all of these new schools, graduating students? What's your take on where we are with that?
Well, there are about 18 packages to unpack in that. So so the profession in 2025 kind of feels like it's 2018, 2019 all over again. And the average practice you can get in to be seen today, maybe in the next day. It's not the 2-week waits. But I think what we're seeing is a little bit more of a demographic distribution of some of the issues. I think when you've got a large number of practices in an urban setting, it's different than when you've got a practice in a rural setting. So I think many of the workforce issues are what I would call a maldistribution of veterinarians. I think I'm in the Los Angeles area, people in the Denver area. There isn't really a shortage of veterinarians. There is just a need in certain practices, and in some cases, there's a need because the doctors are totally fried from not being able to find a veterinarian. The numbers, in at least a number of surveys that I've seen, have indicated about a 2% decrease in the number of transactions per month and that's going on a couple of years now. Well, concurrently, we're also seeing revenue growth at less than 1%, which really is below the cost of living increases that we see. So there is some activity or lack of activity in practices, whereas we were overwhelmed and inundated during the pandemic. We have started to, I'm going to use the term normalize to whatever this next normal is. And some of this comes from conversations within the relief industry too, where the individuals who've been doing relief work have seen the offers for shifts have dropped by 20 to 25% per day. The number of shifts that are posted have decreased as well. So I think we're seeing a lot of uncertainty in our global environment, our external to the profession environment, trickling down to the consumers and making it a little bit harder to spend. I've actually heard individuals comment that the veterinary profession specifically is kind of going through a bit of a recession. And I think if you look back at the data from 2021, 22, it makes sense because our growth really has flattened out dramatically. So here we have a profession that's kind of flattened out in growth. We still have a need for veterinarians in certain parts of the country, areas that maybe aren't the beach, maybe aren't the city, um, some places out in the country that could be years to find. And now we have plans to produce more veterinarians, and we're seeing that not just in the number of veterinary schools that are on the docket to open, but also the number of seats that many of the veterinary schools are planning to matriculate and then graduate over the next few years. Will this help get veterinarians to rural Iowa? Maybe. Will it help get veterinarians to Los Angeles? Sure. People want to come and live here. It's so in answer to your question of the profession, I kind of feel, as I said earlier, I live in Los Angeles, and I feel like we're on a fault line, and there's some shaking going on, and we just really don't know whether to climb underneath the desk or not because we can't tell how big the tremor is actually going to be. And so I think we as a profession need to be more vigilant than we have in the past. I think we have to be cautious in our spend because I think some of our income has been challenged. And I would suggest a lot of some of the underlying impact on transactions and revenue might be a cost of care issue as the cost of everything around us has gone up. And the veterinary profession fee schedules have gone up at a higher rate than the US inflation rate. So all of those make me feel a little queasy, and they should probably make you feel a little queasy as well, because as you talk to different veterinarians, they're really uncertain. And I think that's the term I would use right now is uncertain. I've called it an inflection point because we as a profession have to decide how we want to handle this next normal and come out on the other side better off. Sorry about the long-winded answer.
No, no, I love that. Yeah, and definitely I can resonate with the queasiness, the queasy feeling. And while you were talking about veterinary medicine being in its own recession, I was thinking back to 2007, 2008, where the word on the street was we were a recession-proof industry. And I remember, I was in clinical practice at that time, that it seemed like obviously we were affected by that recession, but it took a little while. We weren't the first industry to be affected. Visits did go down, but it maybe was the next year. It wasn't right away. But I think it is such an important point to remember that of course we're in very uncertain times right now, just kind of in general, and that our industry is not immune to the effects of that for all of the reasons that you just mentioned. And I know this is a question that maybe has way too many answers that we could really explore, but you talked about when we graduate more vets, yes, we're going to have no problem getting more vets to LA, but how do we get more vets to Iowa? And I would imagine that there's only so much that our industry can do about that, but things like, more emergency clinics so there's less on call, so that it's a different type of lifestyle, so that the pay schedule is different. I mean, I would imagine that there are a variety of things that would need to change to really kind of distribute more of the personnel to places where they are needed. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because the quote unquote veterinary deserts are not just in the rural areas or the smaller populated areas, but in Los Angeles because of where people want to live. So what I think we need to try to do is in the same way that we have some debt forgiveness programs for people who do um, shelter work or non-for-profit work. I think we need to try to find ways to do some debt forgiveness for people who go to underserved areas, so-called veterinary deserts, where maybe a good portion of their debt would be forgiven to live and work in areas that have had a difficult time recruiting veterinarians. It also means that to a degree, those people who are the only veterinarian in a 10,000 person community need to start to think about recruiting from that community to encourage people to go to veterinary school, which means we need to be positive about the profession. And I'm sure you've seen the studies that indicate like less than 50% of the veterinarians are actually suggesting friends and family become veterinarians. But, if we're cheerleaders for the profession, then you go out and start recruiting in kindergarten for the next generation of veterinarians who then become your kennel kid, who then go to veterinary school, and who you make an offer that they can't refuse to come back and work for you after graduation, and they become your exit strategy because it's not always easy to recruit somebody to come to a small town. So I think we've got to start to think differently, and human healthcare deals with the same issues, by the way. Um, so we really have to think about should the community band together, maybe the city council, and come up with scholarship funds for little kids that want to become veterinarians that need that help to go to school. We've got to start to think of different ways to bring veterinarians to areas and make a difference. I grew up in the James Herriot era and wanted to live in rural, the Dales of England and Scotland. And it's just, we've got to bring that back. So kids grow up to want to be veterinarians that are coming from the more rural areas and want to go back to those areas and give back to their communities.
Yeah, I love that answer, and part of the reason I hesitated a little to ask the question because I was thinking, and I feel like you really articulated this, is that it can't just be on the veterinary industry to make living and working in those locales attractive and feasible. It also has to be an effort from the community to make that livable. And I love how you bring in sort of um, recruiting people who already live in that area and perhaps are more likely to want to stay in that area as they start their professional life. So I love that. And then kind of following up on that, this idea of veterinarians. Do we have a shortage, or do we just need them in different places? I feel like we've been having this debate for years about whether we have enough veterinarians, but it's only in recent years that I've seen more talk about non-veterinarian team members and shortages of those members of the team. And that, at least to me, feels so much more critical right now. Um, can you talk about this? I mean, are we not training enough veterinary team members? Are we driving them away too quickly with inadequate pay, substandard work conditions? Like, what do you see as some of the root causes, if you could consider that to be an issue, a concern that we don't have enough or that we're not keeping them? Um, I guess do you see that as an issue, and if so, like How do you think? How do you
I
think
think we could spend
where
the
we
next
are?
40 minutes about
Yeah,
that issue.
I'm sure we could.
Okay, so let's look at two buckets. Let's look at the veterinary bucket and let's look at the professional staff team bucket. The veterinary bucket, some of which we lost a lot of high quality, great veterinarians from clinical practice. And let's just say, Emily, that much of what we're talking about is the clinical practice world, the companion animal primarily, especially since this is an AHA conversation. But I'm going to digress for just a minute and say equine, food animal, mixed practice have their own challenges because, you know, they're not getting nearly as many people coming out of school who want to go into equine food animal mixed practice. So we don't have time to dive into that as a discussion unto itself. But first of all, in veterinary practice during the pandemic, we lost a great number of veterinarians from private practice who either went into industry, became relief doctors, or left the profession completely. We have to focus on doctor retention and tighten up the funnel so we're not dropping so many good people through the funnel. And we also have to think about different work schedules because this work-life integration conversation is there's nothing wrong with wanting to work a 30-hour work week. But there's also nothing wrong with hiring two people each to work 30 hours to give yourself 1.5 full-time equivalents in terms of associates or building up from that standpoint. You don't always have to hire a 40 to 50-hour work week individual. So we have to look at the needs of this next generation of young doctors. Now, I am very fortunate. I have contributed to the veterinary workforce because I have a daughter who is 2 years out of veterinary school. So I'm not going to suggest that the solution is that we all make little baby veterinarians, but at least be an advocate for it. I'll get slapped for that one. So we got a workforce issue that is a combination of acquisition and retention. We need the more of the right people, and we need to keep the great ones that we have, and we need to all work together in a collaborative fashion so that we fill the schedules in our veterinary practices to meet the needs of our consumers, the pet owners. Now, we got the doctors. We also have a funnel of staff, and that funnel of staff includes client service people. It includes animal caretakers. It includes assistants. It includes managers, and it includes credentialed technicians. We know from studies that have been published that the life expectancy of a credentialed technician in the veterinary profession is between 5 and 7 years. That is not a very long life expectancy. And so, how do we keep our client service people? How do we keep our credentialed technicians? How do we create careers in the profession, 30-year careers in the profession, and not just 5 to 7-year jobs? And I think you touched on a couple of different things at the very beginning. But I'm going to hit 3 high points that I think are the biggest issues that the veterinary profession has to face. Number one is leadership. I think some of the issues that have been created are because we need to create better leaders in the profession at all levels: organized veterinary medicine, education, clinical practice, and in all the different silos that are out there. So it all starts with leadership because if the leadership believes in the people, they treat them as they're going to be an asset to the practice. But if the leadership doesn't look at the people as an asset, well, if you look at a balance sheet, what's the opposite of an asset? A liability. All right. So, how do you treat your people? Do you treat them as an asset or a liability? If you have an asset, you take care of it, you invest in it. Well, in our people, that's training. That is giving them the tools to ultimately be successful. That is making sure that they have a career path that starts on day one and can go for 30 years. And it could start as an animal caretaker and move into technician or client service or however we want it to do. But we don't take the time to train. But that means the leaders have to invest in training. Well, they don't invest in training because the attitude in many cases is what happens if I train them and they leave? Well, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? And so now what we have from a leadership standpoint is people that were undertrained who we're upset with because we didn't train them. So is it the head chef or is it the sous chef? Well, I'm going to blame the head chef for not training the sous chef to make them ultimately successful. So leadership, lack of training, and the third is communication. I think we have huge issues in practice communication. And with poor communication, that includes not speaking as much, but listening more. We end up with cultural issues, toxicity, and really a workplace that is not attractive. So we don't get people, and it's not retentive. So we lose people. And I think we're starting to build, even within our own profession, a a discomfort of, well, now that I'm leaving leaving this practice, do I want to go work someplace else that could be even worse? So leadership defines it. They need to provide the resources called training to make sure that they're going to be more successful and have a career path. And that's all done with crystal clear communication. And I would suggest on the doctor side, that starts with mentoring. Oh, and on the team side, that includes mentoring as well. Why do we just focus on mentoring of doctors when we've got a new client service person, when we've got a new assistant, or we've got a new credential technician? Don't they deserve the same level of attention as the doctors do, with the thought that this is a team that we're trying to come together and deliver healthcare to our clients? It's not about the individuals. It's about everybody on the team working together, and it starts with leadership believing in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, such good points. And I feel like we are starting to see a little more focus on mentorship at the technician level, but it still seems like not nearly the focus um as what we talk about on the veterinarian level. Um and another point that I hear so much about in terms of team members is pay. You know, how do we show them that we appreciate them? How do we encourage them to want to, as you said, make a 30-year career in veterinary medicine? And if they feel like they can't pay their bills, then that's probably not going to lead to a very long career. Um, and I struggle with this idea because I certainly believe that there are still many instances where a veterinary team member pay could be improved. And as you mentioned earlier, we're also sort of, I don't know if crisis is the right word, you can tell me, but in this period of time where there is a lot of concern over cost of care from the client perspective. And as you said, cost increases are outpacing inflation within our industry. So how can we look at potentially increasing pay for members of our team when we are already receiving so much backlash around the cost that our clients are paying right now?
Great
Maybe there's
question.
no easy answer, but I just thought
Well,
we could talk about it.
yeah, there's no easy answer to any of this, but it comes from what we're doing right now, which is having a conversation. And the conversation that you and I are having, if it goes from us two to four more, to eight, to 16, to 32, the solutions, in my opinion, I'll answer your question in just a second, but the solutions, in my opinion, will come from the grassroots. I don't think that the top down is going to change. I think it's going to be a group of veterinarians coming together and trying to find some solutions to some of the issues that are out there and having these types of conversations. I am all about escalating these types of conversations to panel discussions and entire rooms at small tables and just try to solve problems. The best problems are solved not by the ones who created them, but those who are basically going through them. Okay, so pay and benefits. Uh, there's a six-letter word that has become, in many ways, the bane of our existence. It's called profit. And it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing from a business standpoint to make a profit. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing wrong with making a profit. Okay. And we own a business to make a profit. If you don't make a profit, you own a job because you're really not getting anything from your investment as a business. So there's nothing wrong with that. How we then distribute some of the profit to our people or to controlling costs to clients is really about the vision and the mission of the practice. So if we want to pay our people more, we need them to contribute more. So part of the pay issue is, can we get our people to work to the top of their job descriptions, which of course means they actually have job descriptions, which goes back to the prior discussion on training. And we can go backwards very fast.
I'll connect it.
Yes. Well, it is all connected.
It is,
So
yeah.
if we start to leverage our staff and let them do everything to the top of their job description, which means we have trained them to the items that are in that job description, then the doctors only have to do three things, which is diagnose, prescribe, and do surgery. And if you're in a state where they also have to administer a rabies vaccination, there's those four things. But if we can leverage our technicians to work, credentialed technicians, to work to the top of their job descriptions, they feel better about their jobs, they feel better about their careers, and they feel that they are contributing to the success of the business. I would suggest the same thing that goes true for client service people. We tend to micromanage a little too much in veterinary medicine, and that downplays people's abilities and skills in their own minds. People want to be recognized for the work that they do, and they want to be given more responsibility and more recognition from that standpoint. So, pay is an issue. We have underpaid people for a generation. We have seen on the veterinary side an increase in new graduate salaries on an average of about 10% per year over the last 3 or 4 years. We have seen a significant increase in the salaries for our credentialed technicians and our client service people. But what we've done is we've had to pay more because the environment is competitive, because the demand is high and the supply is low. Econ 101. And so who gets to pay the difference? Well, if you want to keep your profit and your expenses go up, you need to make more revenue. You make more revenue by charging more or seeing more people. Well, to see more people, you have to be more efficient, which means you have to use more of your team. And you can see how this vicious circle goes together. I'm also very big on profit sharing. And if your team is helping to contribute to the profit of your practice, everybody on that team should be recognized for those contributions. Veterinary medicine is a team sport. We can't do it without somebody answering the phone. We can't do it without somebody restraining an animal, taking the radiographs, putting in catheters. So all of these things trickle down. So people have to work to the top of the job descriptions. They have to be trained. They have to be recognized for the great work that they do. And we have to find ways to somehow control our costs without compromising our people so that our clients can afford the care that they need for their pets and not put off the basic care. So now we're starting to see critical cases because they waited, which now makes it more expensive. And we're
Right.
starting infectious disease because the dewormings and the heartworm wasn't done because it was put off because of costs. So there's a lot of moving parts in this conversation. Yes, the average veterinary practice has underpaid their team for a generation. Yes, the average veterinary practice has underutilized their team for a lifetime. If we can figure out how to optimally utilize our team by hiring correctly, training correctly, and retaining, so we don't have to go through this process of hiring and training and hiring and training, we can become more efficient. And the more efficient we are, the more people we can see. And maybe we can start to use our technicians to generate some income as well. And it's not all about the doctor, because we've run doctor-centric practices since Noah. And now we need to have team-centric practices and client-centric practices. And I forgot to say this at the beginning. I'm going to say it right now. When I do a lot of my talks, I start out with three assumptions. Well, the first assumption is, at least in companion animal, veterinary medicine is a service industry delivering healthcare, not a healthcare industry trying to figure out how to deliver service. Number one. Number two, we need to do it from a team-based standpoint and not a doctor-centric standpoint. And number three, it all starts with leadership.
And those are such good reminders. Definitely things that I didn't always understand in practice, particularly about it being a service industry with a healthcare mission, as opposed to being primarily healthcare. And I think that's hard because we tend to look at human medicine and say, oh, well, they don't do it this way in human medicine. Why should we have to? But I think for so many reasons, we can't embrace the exact same model um, as human medicine.
Well, we can't because human medicine is insurance-based healthcare, and we are transactional from that standpoint. But if we want to move into the next realm from a service standpoint, we've got to go from transactional to relational, which means our goal, I talked about doctor retention, I talked about staff retention. There's a very simple algebraic equation. Staff retention equals client retention. So we keep our people, our clients keep coming in because they want to get that consistent experience from seeing the same doctors and seeing the same client service people, etc. So we don't need more clients. We just need to keep the ones we have and keep them happy. And that comes from providing a value proposition, one that they can afford and one that they can appreciate. Human healthcare doesn't tend to do that. They don't care if you wait. We should.
AhaCon 2025 is more than just continuing education. It's your chance to take your career to the next level. Earn race-approved CE credits, engage with industry-leading experts, and gain fresh perspectives to bring back to your practice. Hear from powerhouse speakers, plus enjoy unique experiences like live pet portraits, charm bracelets, professional headshots, resume reviews, and much more. September 11th through 13th in downtown Chicago on the Magnificent Mile. Don't miss this transformative event. Learn more at c.aha.org. That's the letter c.aha.org. Looking for the latest veterinary news? Stay ahead of the curve with stories from the American Animal Hospital Association's digital, award-winning newsroom, Trends. We're bringing you fresh stories every day, covering everything from the cutting-edge clinical insights to helpful practice management tips. And it's not just articles. Watch videos, check out interactive charts, and learn more about the people shaping our industry. As an AHA member, you also unlock exclusive members-only content designed to help you and your team thrive. Visit aha.org/trends today and sign up for Trendsetter, our newsletter where all of our stories are delivered to your inbox twice a week.
As you said, being in a relational industry, we just need to care. And I love that you bring up, not only the team-centric versus doctor-centric, but also sort of the family-based, family-centric. And we talk a lot about that at AHA now with the family centered care and the community care guidelines where we are looking at, what the whole family needs to really provide that care for the pet, and really taking the human aspect of it into account when we're interacting with that family, when we're making our recommendations. And it just seems like we can't really operate any other way and expect to be successful at this
Yeah,
point.
it's interesting because what we've been talking about up until now is really within the practice. But the clients, we need to communicate more with them than we've ever communicated with them before. In my opinion, we dropped the ball a great deal during the pandemic because we were so busy being busy. We didn't always recognize our best clients. We didn't get them in when they should have come in, and they ended up going to another veterinary hospital. And now, because we've been so busy, we stopped marketing. We stopped communicating. We stopped building a relationship. A relationship isn't just once every year when your pet comes in and sees the doctor. Your relationship is every month in the 365 days, the 12 months between visits, or 8 months between visits, or whatever it is from that standpoint. So I would suggest that right now, as we're in this inflection point, the use of every marketing tool that we can that's out there to tighten that bond with our clients, to educate them, to give them the tools that they can use to be a better pet owner from a preventative care standpoint, to break some of these large visits down into smaller bite-sized pieces, to use some technologies, whether it's email, whether it's text, whether it's an online appointment book, an online pharmacy, home delivery of food. We have to continue to integrate the technologies that we have out there and communicate with our clients more often than we have in the past, because I think the expectations, remember, service industry providing health care, the expectations are getting higher and higher in conjunction with the fees. And if we have a huge disconnect between value and fees, that's when clients go elsewhere. So I can't emphasize enough the fact that we as a profession have to start becoming teachers of our clients so that they can become better pet advocates as well.
Such an important point. And as you said, it's not so much about drumming up a whole bunch of new clients as keeping the ones that you have, keeping them engaged, encouraging them to come back for the things that maybe you've already told them that they need. Um, but perhaps they might be tempted to skip or delay. Um, and then I have another question, sort of on the same topic, related to like communication with clients and this idea of like consumer confidence. I remember growing up and as a young adult and going into the veterinary profession, always hearing, and I can't quote it or tell you exactly where I heard it, but always hearing that veterinarians are just highly regarded by the public as being very trustworthy. Um, and I remember being very, very proud of that. Um, and in recent years, I guess I can only speak for myself, but I have worried personally that perhaps that is no longer the case, or at least not to the same degree. With all of the negative talk you hear about, obviously social media and the way people kind of bash their veterinary clinic when they're not happy with the care or how much things have cost or when they couldn't get in when they needed to be seen, and how that all gets amplified. And then just the cost of care by itself and how much concern and complaining we sometimes see about that. And sometimes for good reason. Sometimes it is just, I look at prices that I see quoted and it feels to me very expensive. And I have worried that perhaps that trust is diminished. I saw a report that was just published a few months ago. I think it was sponsored by Beringer Ingelheim. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was a report of consumer confidence, and it was saying that 90% of animal owners still had a great deal of trust and appreciation in their veterinary teams. But when they asked the veterinary teams how high that trust was, only 49% of respondents thought that the public trusted them. So, and that kind of reminds me, if I think back to like the Merck veterinary well-being study, there was, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it was, I don't know, 70 something percent of veterinarians rated their well-being as good, but they all thought that their coworkers were not doing as well. They all thought that everybody else wasn't doing well. So, are we just kind of like two in the middle of things? Am I just two in the middle of things? I think things are maybe worse off in that regard than they are, but the public still has a pretty good level of trust in us. Like, what's your gauge on that? Do you
Well,
have
there's
a
about six,
sense?
six issues in there as well.
I know.
Um, so we have trust issues as a profession. We have them within our practices. Goes back to the conversation about training. Can we train people to a level of trust so that they can perform? We have trust issues that have developed with clients, and I think they were exacerbated by the pandemic where clients couldn't come in the building. We took their pet away. They couldn't see what was going on. And so some of the, veterinary medicine used to be one of the top two rated professions when it came to trust. I think we were right behind nurses, and I think lawyers were at the end. Um, but I do think we do have trust issues, and I think we have to rebuild the trust. What's interesting is that we as a profession are not great cheerleaders for ourselves. We don't get out there and tell people how great we are, and we get defensive when there are social media posts or newspaper articles that shed us in a questionable light. Now, we all know that negative news sells because just turn on the TV. Besides the Hallmarks channel, find me a TV network that focuses on the positivity of life. And so we really need to focus on positivity. It goes back to the Merck study from that standpoint. And we need to try to bring fun back into veterinary medicine, because where else do you get to play with puppies and kittens all day? Of course, we have to deal with euthanasia on the other side of things. So we have trust issues. We have trust issues within the practice. We have trust issues from our clients. And we have trust issues that we don't trust our clients. Well, I would suggest that maybe it comes from communication, because we don't always listen to what our clients have to say, and we don't ask them what their needs are. We have been doctor-centric. Leaders are listeners. We need to ask clients questions. We need to ask them for their answers. And it's not just the doctor, by the way. This is team-driven. So you could have client service people, you could have credentialed technicians, you could have assistants asking clients questions. But if you want to build a relationship, you need to hear what people's needs are and address those needs. And that comes from communication, and that comes from asking great questions. Our reptilian brains go back to defense. Every time, I mean, listen, it's been a long time since I've been in an exam room, but I can tell you just about every negative experience I had with a client in my 15, 20 years in practice. And there were probably 10 times more positive ones. And you could probably do the same thing, because it gets embedded in our defense mechanisms that we're not going to let this happen again. So happy endings, we don't remember. Aggressive clients, difficult clients, you never forget.
Stay with
We've
us
got to,
forever. Yeah.
yeah. But when do we get the most thank you notes?
Euthanasias.
Exactly. If we do good death, we get recognized. But what
Yeah.
about all the time in between? Why don't we celebrate the times in between? We get so focused on death. We call that compassion fatigue. But we really don't take the time to celebrate the positives. And I really do think that the profession as a whole needs to be cheerleaders and positive about it. And again, it goes back to why do less than 50% of veterinarians want to tell people to become veterinarians? Salaries have been bumped up. Some of the changes in work work schedules have made workforce-ish, the places of work more positive. There's a lot more well-being focused in practices from that standpoint. I do think that the cost of care has started to become a barrier to clients, and that becomes a negative situation. And it's a hard one to change, because we have to give greater value than ever. And what is value to a pet owner? Our time. What do we have as a very limited commodity? Our time. So you can see all of these vicious cycles all interspersed, working together, that really we have to try to think about how we how can we build trust within our teams? How can we build trust from our clients? How can we give trust to our clients? And I think some of those will help decrease the barriers that we're getting with respect to cost of care. But we can't ignore the cost of care question, because it's front and center, and it's top of mind when somebody. I think the recent Care Credit study indicated that 80% of pet owners can't afford the average cost of care. So it means 4 out of every 5 pet owners who walk through your door are anxious about a bill that they don't even know about yet. How do we address and build that confidence and that warm feeling back in our clients that they used to have, but that due to all sorts of external and internal variables, we've started to lose some of that trust. We've lost the loving feeling. You can
I'm gonna have
sing.
that song in my head
Go ahead. Sing it.
for the rest of the day now. Um, yeah, no, that's definitely a good way to think about it. And again, we could go on and on. We're certainly not going to unravel all of cost of care. I have one other can of worms that I'd like to maybe just crack open a little bit with you, and see what your thoughts are. This is not something that I have any specific experience with. I've never been a practice owner. I've never purchased a practice or sold a practice, but it's about practice valuation. So if I'm an independent practice owner and I want to sell my practice, I'm going to retire. Um, my understanding from my research is now I could potentially sell it for, I think I read 8 to 13 times EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. Um, and I've seen some concerns out there, I think, by individuals who potentially would want to purchase a practice who feel like spending that much money or indebting themselves that much to purchase a practice does not feel sustainable, feasible, possible to them. Whereas I understand perhaps, I don't know how long ago, but previously you might have been able to purchase a practice for more like 4 to 8 times EBITDA. And it seems like maybe only corporations can afford to spend what sort of the going valuation rates are now. I'm curious, like, is that a big problem right now? Maybe how do we get here? And is it, I'll stop asking like 6 questions at once, but I'm just curious on your thoughts on the topic.
Okay, well, first of all, it's better than it was. Because if we had this conversation in 2021, 2022, those multipliers are around 20%, 20 times EBITDA. So 13 times is better than it was. The concern that a lot of buyers have is this competition with the national aggregators. Can they compete on a price point? And yes, depending upon the seller, if a seller wants to get their full 12 times EBITDA, the banks will help define how much of a loan a buyer can get. And it may not be the full 12 times. Maybe it's 8 times. So then maybe we can look to work with the seller financing, where the seller holds back some of the price and the buyer pays it out over time. So there's all sorts of different ways to start to think about it. At 20 times earnings, you couldn't do it. Between 8 and 12 times, I think that you can. And I think that if you're buying a practice, you need to do your due diligence and make sure that there is growth opportunities, that the profitability is real, and that you can maintain the practice at that profitability or make some changes to make it even more profitable. We don't buy a lot of fixer-uppers. If you can buy a fixer-upper practice at a lower price point and you want to invest some money and make it into a successful practice, that's still a great option. In my humble opinion, and I just wrote an article about this in one of the other trade journals, we are at a renaissance of entrepreneurship. No time in the last probably 10 years has it been a better time for young associates or independent doctors to own independent hospitals and to make them more profitable through efficiencies, through training, through leadership. And I do think, and I do know that the banks are eager to help independent hospitals buy well-managed practices because they don't want to have a bad investment. So, ladies and gentlemen out there who are listening, it is very difficult to fail a veterinary hospital. Success rate pushes 99.5%. Less than 0.5% of veterinary hospitals actually fail. So if we can find practices that need some tweaking, that have a fair market value, and that the banks will loan a portion of it, let's talk to the sellers so that they can retain their legacy and get a buyout over a period of time. The risk of failure is relatively low. And if I'm a seller and the bank is willing to take the risk, I would feel pretty comfortable that I could take the risk as well from that standpoint. Some of the other things to think about from a seller standpoint is if you're selling to an aggregator, Some of the aggregators are asking you to stay on for 3 years. They're asking you to wait and get some of the commitment over time. It's not necessarily going to be 100% cash up front, but if you have a great associate and you don't give them an opportunity to be your exit strategy, they'll walk across the street and get financed by a bank to do a startup, and you won't have an exit strategy. I really do think this concept of which was the trend when I came out of school of associates buying the practices that we're in. This goes back to when we started our conversation about creating careers, not just jobs.
Right.
I think the concept of creating the next generation of young entrepreneurs comes from current sellers looking within. And don't tell me veterinary students don't want to be owners. They do. They are just being misled and misfed information. And you, as an owner of a hospital, need to think about, can you keep your legacy when somebody else owns it and you have no control, versus selling it to your associate who was brought up by your mentoring and your vision. So in answer to your question, it is a great time to consider buying a hospital, but it's got to be the right hospital, and it's got to be a hospital where you can take your vision and direction and make it yours.
Great. Well, I'm glad for that optimism. So thank you for that, because I think there are probably a lot of people out there who need that, who need to hear that. Um, and kind of continuing on the theme of optimism, I like to ask, just kind of at the end of our discussion, what's one thing that you're excited about? It could be something in vet med that's already happening, something that you're excited about, hopefully happening in the future.
I'm going to give you two answers. One, I'm excited about technology, and I'm excited on technology from a diagnostic standpoint and from a clinical standpoint, but I'm also excited about technologies that can possibly make the client experience better, more efficient. Um, and I think those are great. But I am really excited, and I said it in my last answer. I'm very excited about the opportunities within the profession to retain its independence, to grow this next generation of 2, 3, 4 doctor hospitals that might be owned by 3 doctors and in certain states, a technician and a manager. Imagine 3 doctors, a technician, and a manager all owning 20% of the hospital, so that we can now create golden handcuffs and or profit for the staff who are contributing. I really do think that some of what we can do is to reward our team for their contributions, and ownership is one way to do it if you're in a state that allows it. So I'm very optimistic about the opportunities for independent practices to grow, develop, and be successful, but it starts with leadership, goes through training, continues with communication, and it's all about collaboration, because I really do think that this is a profession of colleagues and not competitors.
Definitely looking forward to seeing those things happen. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for the invitation, and look forward to continuing the conversation. If you capture me somewhere, I'll be more than happy to sit around, have a glass of water, and talk to you about any of these issues.
I would love that.